still experiencing it, or it ended several years ago, but they're still living in a state of survival in their body as well. There are organizations and companies that will go so far as to pay other people off to hide deception, lies, misconduct. They will go as far as to try to paint you as someone who was already previously injured or already previously had a mental health challenge or psychological illness or injury pre-incident. They will try to paint your character in a certain way. This is what many people aren't prepared for. I personally was quite shocked and not prepared for all of the witnesses turning around at the very end of my case, turning around and changing their stories and essentially lying. So originally there was evidence that was put forward, witness statements that were put forward, and people that were spoken to about what had been seen, what had not been seen, and to congregate the information that I personally shared versus what the company was personally sharing. So that's an example of something that many people aren't actually prepared for, is the injustice beyond the injustice that has first happened after a particular incident, but there's the injustice through the process for most people's cases, especially if you're going up against particularly government organizations and very, very large companies that have the money to pay off people, or they have little intricacies when these particular legal cases come about that stop or withhold information from the actual the person who's been impacted and stop them from sharing that information in a public setting, for example. These are some of the things that can occur, that can happen. I've also heard stories, people that I've been speaking to on here, on TikTok, of people from the company showing up at their house and threatening them. People coming together from the company or organization, creating a narrative that is essentially a lie and putting that forth in the legal settings to basically win or go up with stronger evidence against the particular employee or the particular person. This makes it very, very difficult for the person that's involved and energetically tied to this whole situation. I think it's really important to be aware of these things that can possibly occur if depending who you're going up against. When we're talking about companies and organizations, it's very different for a small business versus a large organization. They have very, very different sources of power, money, and I would even go as far to say the connections within a government and within the tribunal settings. If you're experiencing something as serious as these kinds of behaviors that is actually taking such a huge emotional toll on your health and your body and your overall life, and you're living out of this state of survival and fear, that is when I would personally ask yourself, is this worth me continuing to pursue? Because in most cases, your mental health, your emotional health is worth billions and is not worth continuing down this particular path that is essentially a dead end. You know, you're fighting with a brick wall essentially. When you're coming up against systems and powers that have been built to essentially keep you quiet and destroy you, and your mental health is not worth that. Again, some of the people that I've spoken to have been battling these kinds of fights for years upon years, and sometimes the win is cutting your losses, being so proud of speaking up and having the courage to go out up against some of these large organizations, but it's not worth it when it is killing your body silently. Your body now has all of these physical problems and challenges, and you haven't even been able to move forward in your life because you've been essentially tied to this situation, this process. In my opinion, that is not worth your health. That is not worth your body. Please be mindful of what your particular case is actually going to be leading into. It will be very telling based on the very first circumstance of submitting a work cover claim. If the employer correctly says, yes, this incident happened, work cover claim is approved, that's usually the hardest part to come over, and hopefully it will be as smooth of a process as it can possibly be in this situation. But if they lie and go up against your witness statements, your medical evidence, and they in the beginning reject and deny that any of these things or incidences, behaviours happened, you're going to be in for at least 3 years of a process. And that's something to really ask yourself, is that something to emotionally, is that something that you can emotionally hold for possibly the next 3 and even more, possibly the next 3+ years? There's been people in longer situations. Your health is the foundation to your overall life, and nothing